Good afternoon. In part 3 of our Angry Alien Bulletin, we have saved the best for last, the results of a 10-month field research study that was meticulously conducted at the Robert Moses State Park by a research team that was affiliated with Harvard University's Galileo Project. The team's objective was to determine if aerial phenomena of an unknown nature exist over a coastal location off the shoreline of Long Island, New York, and to characterize their properties and behaviors. The team utilized a massive array of optical devices and other scientific equipment to confirm the validity of what they were looking at, to confirm that these were indeed unidentified aerial phenomena and not something that could be easily explained away by some kind of man-made device or some sort of naturally occurring event. And the results of this study are intriguing to say the least. All of this and more coming at you on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to our latest Angry Alien Bulletin. Today, the footage that you're going to be looking at for the most part is off of Geneded's UFO footage website, which has some incredible stuff, and I've included it here because it bears some visual resemblance to the phenomena that were observed by this research team. However, a lot of this footage is still under investigation right now, and I am in communication with the authors of the paper today, actually, to try to get some actual footage from the study before I release this content. We will see by the end of the video if I actually am successful in doing this, but nevertheless, the results of the study itself are fascinating on their face value. So here's why the study was carried out. As most of us have probably heard by now, an increasing number of UAP cases have been reported off of America's coastline by the military and civilians alike. So the objective of this team was to study any potential UAP-related events that could be observed off the coast of the United States, specifically off the coast of Long Island. And why here? Well, it was chosen based on anecdotal historical records of observations that apparently have taken place here, a significant number of reports actually, and also the UAP ODNI report. And by the way, that stands for Office of the Director of National Intelligence, described a number of UAP incursions that took place off this particular seaboard as close as 10 nautical miles from the coast. This suggested to the researchers that this would be a promising place to conduct their research, and there were other reasons that they chose to use this area. First of all, there's minimal light pollution in this particular park, open space parking and access to beachfront real estate, limited human activity after core park hours, and human activity being restricted to researchers, stargazers, and fishermen who require permits, and security patrols, but the general public being restricted after 7 p.m. because the park is closed after dusk. In addition, large parking areas were available to conduct their research, liberty to establish an equipment perimeter for their vehicle and their equipment, minimal air traffic after midnight, ability to make low-light observations such as satellites, and also the geographic position was chosen based on pilot observations. For example, U.S. Naval Strike Group exercises off the East Coast where offshore encounters took place in 2014. In addition, this research team got a lot of cooperation from the government. For example, they were granted long-term research permits by the New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation to conduct their eye-on-the-sky coastal study of UAPs, and the FCC granted their research vehicle called the Nightcrawler an experimental active radar use license. The FCC seldom, if ever, issues these kinds kinds of licenses, and this is definitely the first time that this sort of license has been issued to a group of UFO researchers. But there's a lot more to be said about how thorough this group was in their research. First of all, we need to talk about the instruments that they deployed. In addition to lots of different cameras, I mean, we're talking high magnification telescopic cameras, hyperspectral cameras, multispectral electro-optical cameras. I barely understand how a lot of these work, to be honest. Forward-looking infrared cameras. That's very important given how many UAPs have been spotted on infrared sensors and not with visual equipment. In addition to that, they had electromagnetic field detectors and spectrum analyzers, ultrasonic and acoustic transducers, Geiger counters and semiconductor diode sensors, LiDAR rangefinders. That's incredibly important. It's very difficult to determine the size of something that you're looking at unless you really know what the range is, and they had instruments to help out with that as well. They also had apps called Flight Radar 24 and AirNav to help them identify any sort of commercial air traffic that might wander into the study area, and on top of that, a marine traffic app in order to identify any sort of boats that might be wandering into the region as well. When it comes right down to it, they really loaded themselves up with equipment to make sure that they didn't misidentify anything easy, like, for example, drones, commercial planes, boats, satellites, and meteors. And in addition to that, they had a mobile laboratory called the Nightcrawler. Actually, they had two of them, the Nightcrawler 1 and 2, and this vehicle was equipped even with a Faraday cage to prevent electromagnetic and radio interference from human devices from entering the laboratory while they were taking their readings. We're talking about a very well-equipped and very thorough scientific team, at least from my initial observations anyway. My first impressions are that this is a team that was very serious about what they were doing. They even did a lot of study in terms of the thermal atmospheric characteristics of the area they were studying to make sure that thermal inversion phenomena could not invalidate the readings that they were taking. Also, during the time that they were conducting their research, the scientists made sure that they had a thorough understanding of where the airport locations were, the types of flight patterns that the aircraft in the flight corridors for these airports would adhere to. They would observe aircraft in these holding patterns to make sure that they understood exactly what these aircraft look like during these approaches, so that it was very clear when they were spotting a commercial aircraft and not something else, and also to understand the lighting patterns of commercial aircraft. For example, navigation lights on an aircraft's wingtips are green-colored lights on the starboard side, red-colored lights on the port side, and white lights on the tail section. And then anti-collision lights are bright red flashing proximity beacons on the aircraft's top and ventral or underside. By the way, I got to see those when a helicopter mysteriously set down about 10 houses away from my flat just outside of Milton Keynes. To this day, I don't know what that helicopter was doing there, but it was there for a couple of hours before it finally took off at night, and I saw those bright red flashing lights. It's universal regardless of what country you're in. And the paper also explains in great detail the methods and equipment that were used in order to determine the distance to the objects and phenomena that they observed. So now that we've reviewed everything that the scientists did to make sure that they were actually bringing back some legitimate data, legitimate sightings that were not something that could be explained away, but rather something that is legitimately unexplained phenomena, What did they actually see? Well, let's go ahead and get to the footage. They observed odd displays of light that frequented the coastlines, especially more abundant on and off the south shore. Whether they're more of a coastal phenomenon or if there are equal numbers of incursions inland remains to be seen, because most of the effort was focused offshore. Now, one cautionary aspect that the researchers found is that visual sightings from human observers on the ground often make perceptual errors in judging precise location and position. For instance, when the scientists observed aircraft and unknown objects that appeared overhead, and attempts were made to correlate that location with radar tracks and triangulation methods, the actual position was near or off the coast rather than inland, even though the objects didn't appear to be inland. Depth of field can be distorted depending on unknown size variations, minimal detail of physical attributes, and foreground or background landmark contrasts. The objects can appear closer or farther than they actually are, which is a very common thing with UAP sightings. But interestingly enough, because of all the equipment these researchers had at their disposal, these kinds of errors could be kept to a minimum. Now, according to the researchers, they followed the scientific method and process through stringent field protocols to collect data and evaluate possible evidence. They speculated and hypothesized about what other natural explanations might make sense for what they saw, and they explored and investigated the possibility of maritime surveillance drones or drones that might be used for dredging operations or coastal and seafloor mapping operations. They also considered Department of Defense, military, or foreign adversarial activities. However, the researchers determined that these were the least likely explanations. According to the researchers, and I'm quoting directly from the paper here, the unknown objects appear to be elusive, and they frequently remain just outside the spectral range of human sensory perception. They are primarily seen within the infrared bandwidth and may occasionally be observed in the visible spectrum when their albedo or luminosity is sufficiently intense to be seen. So let's be clear about the implications of these findings. What this means is these objects generally cannot be seen with the human eye. That is in stark contrast to drones and other things that are frequently mistaken for UFOs. We are instead talking about a phenomena that generally cannot be seen by human beings at all. And why would someone want to fake things like this by utilizing IR sources only? It makes no sense. The only thing that makes sense to me is some sort of atmospheric phenomena that we do not yet understand or have yet to identify, or military aircraft or military devices that only use infrared sensors. On rare occasions when these objects and luminosities were perceptible in the visual spectrum, they assumed variations in color frequencies such as white, blue, and occasionally iridescent, orange, and red. The unknown objects have displayed quantifiable features so they could assign some sort of taxonomic and morphometric details for referencing the differing forms. There are apparently 4 or 5 general variations in shape, geometries, and consistencies in a relative size from 1.5 to 3 meters in diameter. And by the way, a lot of the objects were apparently spherical in shape, so spherical and roughly this size corresponds to a lot of the UAPs described in various aero reports. Their behaviors were transitory, random, indifferent, and purposeless at times. There were moments when these objects demonstrated an awareness of the researchers and some level of organization, intelligence, and even interaction with one another. There are instances where some really bizarre features were noted, such as luminous objects suddenly appearing and rising from out of the ground where none had been seen previously. Sometimes they would see them sitting on the ocean surface or passing beneath it without disturbing the ocean and without making any sound. They also noted some interesting outliers. For example, measurements of electromagnetic field power flux densities resulted in some interesting electromagnetic signals that were taking place. They they corresponded with some of the coastal life phenomena, and so too did some ultrasonic signals that were detected at the same time. Again, this happened in a minority of cases, but nevertheless, it did happen. So in the end, the researchers were left with many questions and not too many answers. They thought perhaps that there might be another natural explanation, such as unusual atmospheric phenomena such as uniquely stacked water crystals and prism effects or plasmas, bizarre luminosities due to some sort of unknown electrical, chemo-electrical dynamo, or ionized luminescent gaseous states. These sorts of things are starting to be studied. However, most of them tend to occur above the troposphere and not at sea level. So in the end, the researchers definitely seem to have found something going on off the coast of Long Island. What it is, we still can't really determine or even speculate that much, but they are currently trying to secure new funding to examine all of these phenomena in greater detail. And why is it so important? Why would we want to spend more money on all of this? Well, one particular incident that they refer to is TWA Flight 800. Keep in mind that military pilots have commonly said that these objects have threatened to run into them, or at least have made their flight rather hazardous. But in July of 1996, a commercial airline exploded very close to this research area. The event was witnessed by many credible onlookers who claimed that they saw an object or light traveling at high velocity towards the ill-fated plane. Now, was a UFO responsible for this accident? Well, that remains to be seen, and according to the FAA, it was a fuel explosion possibly caused by a short circuit inside the aircraft. Apparently, there were some problems in the aircraft's wings, so it's a little early to blame this on a UAP, but nevertheless, the resultant loss of 230 international passengers demands that we seriously consider this possibility to understand and prevent additional near misses and potential incidents if these incidents are actually taking place. And it does indeed seem that at least something is going on over the Atlantic Ocean, something that has been observed by numerous commercial and military pilots, something that has disrupted air traffic in this region for years now, and something that apparently has been confirmed by a team of researchers who have done their level best to eliminate all the usual suspects for mistaken UAP sightings, and have still come up with something very strange and unexplained. I will be bringing you more details on this amazing study because in the time that I've been putting all of this together, the paper's authors have agreed to grant me an interview. I will keep you up to date on my progress with that, so I'm very excited to bring you more details on what these folks' findings actually were off the coast of Long Island, so please stay tuned. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon, and as always, stay angry about space.